Another draft physics video presentation. Hopefully a shortish video, just on a couple of little subjects. So I was watching a physics girl video, and she goes into a little part here and just does stuff and just didn't make any sense. And then I thought about it, and it's an obvious, mathematical mistake. So I mean, these videos, she produces them. They're not just thrown together. They're not just they just don't happen. They're scripted and all this crap, and it's such a basic conceptual mistake that I just thought I would rub it in, just to point out how they really don't even understand the concepts, because some bell should have been going off saying, "Oh, that can't be right," and nothing went off. I mean, she didn't get it at all. So anyway, so the idea is two train cars are going to combine their momentum. So one's standing still and one's going, whatever, to something or other, 12 meters per second. And they both weigh the same. And then after they collide, they'll have a collective mass and, again, a collective momentum that you logically could understand is going to be the same. And what's going to change is the speed, that it's going to go half as fast. That's in a perfect circumstance, where all the energy is conserved, none of it's destroyed. So we already have a perfect circumstance for that, which makes it even more illogical what she's going to do here. So she's doing the little math equation, basically just saying what's momentum. Well, momentum is mass times velocity, and if I do mass times velocity after the collision, I should get the same number, and I do, except for whatever losses there would be, which would be minor.
And that equals our final momentum, which is m1 plus m2, so that's 4 kilograms times v final. And in order to get 24, v final has to be 6 meters per second, so my v final equals 6 meters per second. So
right, so you don't even need math to figure this out, right? You just say, oh, it weighs the same, I got twice as much matter, the same amount of energy, it goes half as fast. So it's a no-brainer.
6 meters per second. We ended up with half of the initial velocity, which makes sense because we said the two cars have equal masses, and we only had one of the masses moving at the start. So now you've got double the moving mass at the end. So they must be going half of the original speed if momentum is conserved. And that's our base.
No, if energy is conserved, period. So this is about energy. Momentum is energy. There's no other form of energy, frankly. It's all momentum. Everything carries momentum. That's energy.
Inelastic collision problem solved using conservation of momentum. But what about conservation of energy?
You don't use the conservation theory, you obey it.
Is kinetic energy conserved in our system here? Surprisingly, no.
So, I don't know, see, it's just such a wrong answer, okay? It always has to be conserved, all right? You can't unconserve it. It has to be conserved, so it has to go somewhere if you're going to say it went somewhere. If you're going to say there's not as much, you got to explain where it went, and it would have the same effect on the velocity. You can't lower the kinetic energy without lowering the momentum. You have to. So if you're going to say the kinetic energy is less, you're going to have to explain where it went, and the only way it can go anywhere in that equation is with velocity. You can't make the masses less, so you have to make the velocity less. So if there's any losses, it should be in your number, from 12 miles an hour to 6 miles an hour. Well, maybe it's only 5.5 and there's some losses. But what she does here is so wrong. I mean, I'm just saying conceptually, she doesn't understand that you have to conserve kinetic energy too. In the sense that you have to, you can convert it into potential energy, but you can't convert it into nothing.
See why by working out the math. Let's calculate the energies before and after the collision. Kinetic energy initial is just going to be 1/2 mv squared.
So this is Newton's old. I never liked this formula much because of the 1/2 thing. It just implies that somehow you're losing energy somewhere, like only half the amount of energy exists, and it's not true.
Before the collision, we only have the first car moving, so the total energy is 1/2 m1 times v1 squared.
Okay, so she says m1 times v1 squared. It's not times velocity squared. It's not the mass times the velocity squared. It's mv squared. So this is like a basic trigonometry mistake. the mv gets multiplied first. You multiply the mass times the velocity. Then you take that number and square it.
Which is going to be 1/2 times 2 kilograms times 12 meters per second squared.
Now, so it's supposed to be 2 kilograms times 12. So 2 times 12, then you square that number. And when you do it for the larger mass that's going half the speed, then it would be 4 times 6 squared, which is 24. Then you see that the kinetic energy remains the same. So, I mean, it's, she's doing these videos. This is supposed to be a review before you take your AP physics test. You're not going to do very well on the test if you use this as a review.
Which works out to 144 joules. After the collision, so our final kinetic energy equals 1/2 mv squared. But my final mass is both masses together, which equals 4.
So you don't do the 1/2, you just do the mv first, then you do the square, and then you do the half.
Kilograms. So this equals 1/2 times 4 kilograms. And then my final velocity squared, so my 6 meters per second squared. And that equals 72 joules. So
just realize how silly it is in a way. She doesn't quite understand that kinetic energy is a way of describing a work function. And she's kind of, what is basically saying here is if I have two cars and they're separated by 2 inches, okay, going 6 miles an hour versus, one car going 12, that somehow you would need more energy to stop them. And you wouldn't. It's all the same amount of proportionality exists, so it would take the same energy to stop them. It's just a fact. And so this like she's implying that half the energy is lost, and it's so much easier to stop the twice as heavy car going half as fast as it takes energy to stop the half as heavy car that's going twice as fast, and it really doesn't take more energy.
We lost kinetic energy. So what happened to the energy? Well, in an inelastic collision, when the colliding objects stick, some of the original kinetic energy is lost. Some of it escapes as heat. Oftentimes it goes into the object's mechanical deformation, like if
So, in her example, we're talking about 2 train cars coupling. There's very little losses. It's all rigid bodies. It's all, the acceleration of the car is very quick. Now, you could argue that there are some losses to acceleration, but half the energy? No. Silly. And again, you're still stuck with the fact she already calculated the momentum to be exactly the same. So there were no losses because she calculated the momentum to be exactly the same. So how can you have exactly the same amount of momentum and lose half the energy?
Throw an egg
Newsflash, you can't. So again, so if she just did the formula
against the wall and it deforms
correctly, then she wouldn't have to use this deformation argument and all this other crap about how come there was a bunch of losses, and there wasn't any that she cited. I'm sure there are some real ones, but there still wouldn't be half the energy.
Or a ping pong ball hits some fruit and it deforms. The energy isn't lost to the universe, but it is no longer in the system of the two things that collided, so we can't easily measure it.
And it wouldn't matter anyway, right? Because we're really saying that energy is just perceived. So some of the energy is lost in the sense that if you cause something to move against another thing's movement, then you can end up with no energy. You can have 2 opposite pieces of energy and they'll just cancel each other. But anyway, no point in going into that.
So when you have a collision,
no point in making it more complicated. Anyway, it's just a pretty gross mathematical error, and these people are such whores for their mathematics that it's surprising that nobody's caught it. Nobody that you can notice. They just talk about how much they love her and all that. Oh, they love, happy, fun, blah, 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 blah. And it's got, an egregious error in it. So anyway, just in kind of a petty manner, I'm just pointing it out. That it's junk. It's a produced video, and it's still a pile of junk. They had time to think about it. They had other people editing it, and it's a piece of junk. So anyway, on to commenters. So the Jay Leno, or whoever the hell he is, what was his name? Forget. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mick Jagger's wife, Jerry Hall or something. There's a lot to say about the double-slit experiment. Fuck you. One thing you never mention, which is just a lie, so you're always doing this, you're just such liars, compulsive liars, is that you get this pattern even when you shoot one photon at a time. So I've done the Veritasium video on that subject at least twice, maybe 3 times. I've actually played clips from the video. 3 times. I've referenced it numerous times. In the very last video it was brought up and I mentioned it again, and how it's kind of complicated, single photons. So again, this is just such a lie. I never mentioned it. Of course I've mentioned it. The theory of single photon is suspect. That's the clear point I'm going to argue. And if you can, at some day, at some point, you can prove that you have only in the atmosphere this single photon. Like if you could prove between 2 polarizing films that only 50% of the light went through the first filter, like half the light is actually dead, it's gone, it's used up, it hit something, crashed, and burned. And on the other side of the filter, there's only 50% of the light. You think someday you could prove that? Yeah, it's a complex argument. The argument is that photons are a little more subtle than you want to force them to be. You want to straw man the argument and force photons to be something they don't have to be. They're composite objects, and there's pieces of them all over the place. And it's just about sometimes putting the pieces back together. I would argue every time you look at the sun through through the atmosphere at a sunset, you're not seeing any photons that were the photons that left the sun. You're seeing pieces of those photons that now have been rearranged, and you're seeing them after they've been scattered. All right, anyway, you just don't understand the theory. You just don't have enough depth. You don't have a brain that can suppose anything but your crap is right. And so you can only see everything through your crap filter. Anyway, I've heard the argument that it's not possible to do this. Well, apparently you didn't pay attention to the argument. It's complex. How do you exactly know you have just one photon? How do you know? Yeah. By all means difficult, not impossible, says you again. And I'll just point out how, well, when Veritasium attempted the experiment, how come he had to turn the photomultiplier to its highest sensitivity? 7 error photons a second. You don't have to have it way up like that. You could have it turned all the way down, no error photons at all. Why did he have it turned up to 7 error photons a second? Why? Oh, the answer is because the experiment wouldn't work any other way. You couldn't get it to work without ensuring that he had more than 1 photon in the experiment at a time. That's the frank truth. He had to speed everything up, create more errors, so he had to speed it all up, because they can't do it legitimately. All you need is a short pulse of light. There's no short pulse of light versus the frequency of light. We can't create anything like a trillahertz pulse of light. So right there you're in trouble. Photons have trillahertz frequency. How are you going to be able to create a pulse of light that's at a trillahertz? Or whatever the hell it is, megatrillahertz. Sometimes you will get 6 photons, sometimes 1 or 2. Those are complete photons. The argument has always been, from my perspective, that this is the photon you're seeing is a photon made of pieces of a photon. So again, you're just not getting the argument. Not important as long as it's statistically 1 photon at a time that produces a discrete spot. Well, the argument is if I have 5 million pieces and only 17 photons can be made out of those 5 million pieces because I have them scattered over a huge surface. But then when I confine it to a smaller surface, I can get hundreds of thousands of photons to form because I merely confine the pieces to a smaller surface. You're just not getting the fundamental argument. That's interesting, is that you can do this with 1 hour delay or a week. Now, There's absolutely zero evidence of anybody doing it for an hour or a week. The last person to do it apparently was in like whatever 1814 or something. Okay, I mean, I don't know. No, maybe it was 1900. Long time ago. Okay, using a gas flame, before electric lights. That's how long ago it was done for that kind of time period. So you have no evidence of that, no modern evidence, nothing, and you're just citing it as you can do it. Well, the whole point is it really doesn't matter. Even if you do it that way, you're still not recognizing the principle that still doesn't guarantee you're still getting just one photon in the atmosphere at a time. Alright, after a while you get the pattern. This makes no sense, but nature doesn't care if we think it's weird. Well, again, I don't think it's weird. I think it's something to be explained. You're obviously looking for a God and a religion to believe in. There's absolutely no reason to say, oh, it's weird, we can't explain it. There's no reason to believe the magician actually lifted the elephant and spun him around in a circle and all that shit. Okay, we know it's a trick, shithead. And you just don't want to pay any attention to that reality. You just want to sit there and support the mysticism and the guru bullshit. Not saying there isn't any logic. Well, yes, you pretty much are. You're saying fuck being logical. Let's all accept the wooey fake answers, and let's not even look for the real answers. And let's just pretend we did experiments we never did. You know, you're just such a jerk. Of course there is, but like Feynman perhaps would say. So I don't, like I need somebody to be quoting crappy Feynman at me. I've watched a ton of Feynman. I've been through almost every word he ever spoke that was recorded. I'd heard my fill of Feynman's bullshit, and I've pointed out how it's bullshit. I've pointed out that he can't draw a single slit experiment to save his life that's accurate. Alright, fuck Feynman and his bullshit. Fuck Feynman and his arrogant attitude. If I can't think of the right answer, there isn't one. And that's basically all he said. He just said to the world, I'm smarter than all of you assholes. If I can't figure it out, you'll have no hope. And that's your hero. He's an asshole. It's better if we try not to visualize things. Yeah, fuck you. I think quantum mechanics makes sense. Yeah, but you're an idiot. You're a religious kook looking for a god to follow. Okay, you don't want the truth. You want a fucking story that's more interesting. That's just a fact. And so you're just sitting here making these noises. And what should I think? Why should I have any fucking respect for anything you have to say? You over-exaggerate everything. You claim things that aren't true. You're just a piece of shit. Alright, if you treat it as information. Some more horseshit about what the information, everything's a fucking information. Now, everything in the universe isn't informationing. Okay, stuff moves. And when it moves, it impacts other things. You change the world. When you go from point A to point B, you change the universe. And everything has to deal with you at point B instead of at point A. And it has an implication. And that's all there is in the universe. There's just causes and effects. Not a perfect model, but the best we have until we understand things better. You don't even want to understand things better. You're not even trying to understand better. Alright, this isn't that fucking complicated. I mean, me showing you what a photon is, and that has polarization, and that obviously the polarization is much bigger than a single electron, and I'm just pointing out these basic facts, and you won't concede any of them. So you just have no, this is, like I said, you have no credibility as a truth seeker. Alright. I don't think photons themselves are waves. Yeah, so you have some special theory all of your own. Isn't that nice? Fuck. Their position is guided by a wave. Oh, isn't that so special? So the stupid Boolean mechanics, which frankly gets the wrong answer. So again, it doesn't get the right pattern for the two-slit experiment. So, but you'll just pretend it does, right? Because they draw you a picture, and the picture looks like all the lines go somewhere and it's supposed to be right. But if you actually do the math, it doesn't work. It doesn't get you the right pattern. Because there's two sources in his mechanics. Two sources doesn't work. Oh, you see, people are just so fucking stupid. Not a physical one. Not a physical wave. A magical wave. Okay. Yeah, fuck you. You're done, right? We're done. Jesus wave. The wave describes the possible locations where the photon could be. So again, more horseshit. We have no reason to go to this extraordinary step of saying we have to give up on three-dimensional space and things having space, seeing things having position in that three-dimensional space. That's an extraordinary claim. You don't want to back it up with anything. You're just saying we have to jump to this bizarre theory because we can't explain a two-slit experiment. And the reason why you can't explain it is because you just keep lying about what the actual experiment does. It keeps track of them even if you shoot one at a time with long delay. So it keeps track of them. Isn't that special? So none of that crap is necessary. You don't have to leap to these silly conclusions. I mean, you people are worse than religious kooks. Religious kooks were incredibly ignorant, okay? They didn't have fact one about reality, and they drew a rotten conclusion. You have no excuse for jumping to rotten conclusions. No excuse at all. We have a ton of information, and here you are just ready to leap to the extraordinary claim. You fucking UFO nutter. Anyway, it's not just some kind of belief in magic. It's exactly a belief in magic. What the fuck? You're not going to call it God, but random would be the same thing. It's the same thing as saying there's a random God, or there's an invisible man, or there's invisible gremlins that tell the fucking wave where to go. I mean, you're just hopelessly silly. It's not magic. Of course it is. It's a magic answer. It's not a fucking rational answer. I mean, you're explaining one magician's trick by having another magician do a trick on the magician. No, that magic guy over there snuck the bird in his sleeve. That's how he made the bird in his sleeve and then sticked it in his. I mean, it's so fucking hopelessly God of the Gaps horseshit. If it was, then I can guarantee there are many inmendums who would try to debunk it. Well, frankly, there just aren't there? Isn't that the evidence all over the place that there just aren't many inmendums or draft physics is? There just aren't enough of us. You know, or any of us except for me, apparently. The two-slit math hasn't worked for 200 years. The day Young drew it, it was wrong. It's been wrong for 200 years, and not one of you morons could figure that out. Not one of you. It has to have four. If you're going to put waves in the damn picture, you have to have four of them, not two. Two doesn't work. Oh, God. And it obviously doesn't work. Not a little bit doesn't work. No, a lot doesn't work. If it was then, I can guarantee there are many amendments who would try to debunk it. Einstein himself spent most of his life trying to debunk quantum mechanics. Yeah, well, unfortunately, Einstein was a little bit too... See, you know, he didn't have quantum-colored glasses, but he certainly had relativity-covered glasses, and those didn't do him any goddamn good at all. He was the inventor of his own big pile of wooey, spooky action crap. He really had no business pointing his finger at anything else and calling it spooky action, because goddamn fucking bent space is as spooky action as you get. It's the silliest definition of a cause you can almost invent. A nothing is telling the something what to do. Well, that's just crap. Alright, but the truth is that it really is weird. No, it isn't really weird, whatever that is. It's curious at best. Oh, look at that. It's a little bit strange, isn't it? Oh, it's a little bit off. It's not exactly what I expect. Therefore, I should jump to the conclusion it's magic. And I shouldn't sit there and try to figure out a rational reason. And I'm telling you, the truth was just sitting there right in front of you idiots all this time. I mean, photons have a frequency. There's every reason to think they happen over a period of time because of the frequency. So they're not something that just bloops. Bloop, photon, bloop, bloop. No, it's not a bloop. Okay, it has elements to it. It's a Morse code. And you have to send the code to a location, and if the code gets broken on its way, then you're not going to have a message that you can receive. Just like a radio wave. You know, if you break the radio wave, if you change the elements of its frequency, then you won't receive it on your radio. And the same is true for the atoms that you're constructed of. They can only recognize consistent frequencies, not inconsistent ones. Alright. So enough of that. But yeah, just screw you, Jerry. I mean, you can keep commenting if you want, but I mean, you're just showing you start off with no credibility. Talking about how I haven't mentioned something when I've mentioned it, overtly mentioned it. Actually played at least twice. I have played Veritasium's video on the single photon experiment at least twice. The whole video. And you tell me I never mention it. I mean, what a pile of shit. What else would somebody say to that? I said, what a pile of shit. Yeah, we don't need to save that. So anyway, so this is just really for the purpose of calling Jerry an asshole and just pointing out how this physics girl doesn't really know physics. You know, she doesn't get the concepts. So she was taught some math, you know, got through getting her math degree, but she really doesn't get the physics. She didn't really rock it. Yeah. And, you know, she's a, you know, so it's just, I'm just saying, there's a whole bunch of people working on producing this video. She has all these people that are watching the video, and no one yet has figured out, oh, you got a really big error in there. You know, and the fact is, it's written into the script. I mean, the fact is, it's a really big error in the sense that she came up with a whole explanation for why there was a big loss in the kinetic energy. And the explanation is just nonsense, because obviously you can see how two train cars don't get deformed. Where could all the energy possibly go? There's not a lot of places for it to go. Does it go into the rails? Does it go into the sky? Where did all the energy go? And again, her own argument was that the momentum was conserved. You can't conserve momentum and then lose kinetic energy. That's impossible. Momentum and kinetic energy are like an equal sign. You know, kinetic plus potential. And obviously you weren't changing the potential energy because you weren't lifting it up in gravity or something. So there was no way for the train car to add potential energy. There was no spring it was pushing against. There was no mechanism. Potential energy can only be added when you're adding it through a mechanism that can apply force. And there was no mechanism she was pushing against that could apply force back again. So, I mean, it's clearly just a pure kinetic equation. And in that circumstance, you can't convert kinetic energy into potential energy. So in that circumstance, momentum is the same as kinetic energy. All right. So, enough said. And such. All right, I mean, I am really sick of it. I'm just sick that none of these smart people can concede that this is junk physics in so many respects, and that they really haven't earned your trust. Yeah, that's the word. They haven't earned it, and you're just sycophants, and you're embarrassing human intelligence by being so belligerently stupid. So, yeah, that's enough now. Do this again, just I can, and so I will.